Bob McNamara, at the time a group vice president, stood before his colleagues and congratulated them on the success of the Edsel project from the preparation phase. He emphasized three core financial factors that Ford believed would ensure victory and asserted that Edsel would be one of the most rewarding ventures, one of the company's most worthwhile investments. But behind that confident declaration was a different reality. In the mid-1950s, the Ford Motor Company was under immense pressure as General Motors continued to outpace it in market share in its product lineup and even in brand image. They did it extremely well with the Sloan ladder model. A family could start with Chevrolet, then, as their wallet got thicker and their status changed, they would move up to Pontiac or Oldsmobile, then to Buick. And the top of the tower was Cadillac. A car back then was a measure of social status, as clear as a well-fitted suit or a watch on the wrist. Ford looked across and realized it was missing those rungs. It had three brands: Ford, Mercury, Lincoln. It sounded sufficient, but the problem lay in the price gaps and buyer psychology. The space between Ford and Mercury wasn't smooth,
and the step from Mercury up to Lincoln was too large.
When a Ford customer began wanting to upgrade, more luxury, more of that
comfort,
feeling of
more
"I've
luxury,
moved up," they
more
often
of that
didn't
feeling
walk
of
into Mercury,
"I've moved
but
up."
instead turned
They
straight to
often
GM,
didn't walk into
choosing
Mercury,
an Oldsmobile
but
or
instead
Pontiac because
turned
those
straight
names had
to
been stamped by
GM,
society as a
choosing an
logical rung on the
Oldsmobile
ladder.
or Pontiac,
Therefore, Ford's
because
strategy
those
became
names
very clear.
had been stamped
They
by
wanted to become a
society
second General
as a
Motors,
logical rung
not by
on the
copying
ladder.
each model, but by building a brand
Therefore,
ecosystem that
Ford's
would keep
strategy
customers within the
became
Ford
very
family
clear.
through every stage
They
of
wanted
life.
to become
Before
a
Edsel
second
appeared,
General
Ford
Motors,
had tried a very ambitious
not
move,
by copying each
establishing
model,
the Continental
but by
division
building
to go
a
after
brand
the ultra-luxury
ecosystem
segment,
that would
even
keep
aiming
customers
to compete with Rolls-Royce.
within the Ford family
But that ambition
through
couldn't
every
hold up against the
stage
market
of life.
and cost equation. The
Before
project
Edsel
failed
appeared,
and was cancelled,
Ford
leaving
had tried
behind
a very
strategic
ambitious
gap
move,
that still hadn't been
establishing the
filled. And then the
Continental
solution Ford
division
believed was
to
the
go
most correct
after the
was put on the
ultra-luxury
table,
segment,
creating a new brand
even
inserted
aiming to
between Ford
compete
and Mercury,
with Rolls-Royce.
a missing rung in the system.
But that ambition
That was
couldn't hold
Edsel,
up against the
not a
market
premium
and cost
version of
equation.
Ford, and not a
The
renamed
project
Mercury,
failed
but a new
and
name
was
designed to
cancelled,
keep those who were
leaving
preparing
behind
to leave.
a
The
strategic
target
gap
audience Ford aimed for
that still
was very
hadn't been
specific.
filled.
The young middle class,
And then
those
the
young
solution
urban professionals,
Ford
a
believed
man
was the
who had
most
just been
correct
promoted,
was
a
put
young
on the
family
table,
beginning to stabilize,
creating
living
a
in the
new
city
brand
or in developing
inserted
suburbs.
between Ford
They had graduated
and
from the
Mercury,
basic Ford.
a missing
Now they
rung
wanted something
in
more
the
refined,
system.
with more amenities showing that they were moving up, but they didn't have enough money or didn't want to reach Lincoln. The project was born on paper with a name that sounded cold and technical: Project E-Car. In 1955, Ford conducted large-scale market research. They surveyed, interviewed, gathered data, and tried to read what American buyers were craving in a step-up car after the basic Ford. On the reports, everything gradually took shape: the segment, the price point, the message, the target customer group. Edsel, at least in this phase, was nurtured by the belief that if you asked enough people, you would create exactly what they wanted. But then, as the product framework gradually became clear, Ford stumbled over something that seemed small, yet would determine the fate of the entire brand: naming. They set requirements that sounded perfectly reasonable. The name had to be short, easy to remember, sound modern, and most importantly, not rhyme with or evoke associations with vulgar words or negative meanings. In everyday life, Ford tried to solve it the industrial way, launching an internal contest which resulted in about 6,000 proposed names. But the more options they had, the more stuck they became. None of them was strong enough to win everyone over. Things grew so tense that Ford made an unusual move. They hired the poet Marion Moore to come up with a name, and names like Ragnaracer, Utopian Turtletop, and their variations sounded more like characters from a science fiction story than a sedan parked in an American home's driveway. Finally, Chairman Ernest Brerich settled on a name that was familial and symbolic. Edsel, the name of Edsel Ford, Henry Ford's son. And the irony was that this very tribute choice came with a cold reaction. The Ford family objected because they understood one very practical thing. A person's name, especially one unfamiliar to the public ear, might not convey a sense of luxury or speed. It could sound stiff, strange, even difficult to pronounce for many Americans at the time. Edsel's marketing campaign wasn't the launch and sell kind, but a staged production that lasted nearly 2 years in true tease fashion, hiding the car as if it were a national secret, dropping just enough clues to make people curious, then pulling back at the right moment so the craving would grow. The thinking behind that campaign was very clear and very confident. Ford believed the car was so good that it would sell itself. When you've created enough buzz, enough expectation, enough spotlight, then the moment customers see the car for the first time will explode like fireworks. Then, the day was framed like a historic event. E-Day, September 4th, 1957. Edsel launched all at once, not as an ordinary introduction, but like a Ford global celebration where dealers were brightly decorated, displaying it like the unveiling of a new era. And to make sure all of America was looking in the same direction, Ford also rolled out the Edsel Show, a special television program meant to promote the car like the main star on stage. This wasn't just advertising. It was a mass culture spectacle using TV, the thing that was moving into the center of the American family's living room to turn Edsel into that evening's topic. The story people would mention as they shut the set off and poured another cup of coffee. Right after E-Day, the public reaction came faster and colder than Ford expected. Instead of excitement, they saw a shape of a car that left them confused, and the comments began to spread like wildfire. Edsel looked like a Ford after an accident. It didn't deliver the sense of breakthrough the promise had implied. And, for some customers, it also lacked what they were expecting in the late 1950s fashion. Pronounced tail fins, that flamboyant jet-age character. That disappointment immediately turned into numbers. And numbers don't lie. Ford had set a target of 200 001 cars per year, equivalent to about 600 cars a day. But reality stumbled in those early days. In the first week, it was only about 350 cars a day. And that figure didn't rise as expected. It kept declining. Edsel didn't fail because of a single mistake. It failed because multiple layers of misalignment stacked on top of each other like a machine that looks beautiful on the drawing board. But once assembled on the line and pushed out onto the road, every gap begins to creak and crackle. Ford had conducted very deep market research, asking customers what they wanted, but they didn't let the public see the design before the tease campaign inflated expectations to the maximum. As a result, on launch day, people walked into the showroom with an image of the future in their heads. But while the interior looked modern, the sense of fit, finish, and quality didn't match, leaving many even more let down because they weren't only disappointed by the image, they also doubted the value. Next came pricing. Edsel was placed in an overlapping price zone. It pushed up into high-end Fords while also pressing down into the low-end Mercury range. In buyers' minds, two familiar names were already standing on both sides. So, a natural question appeared. If I'm paying almost as much as the nicest Ford, why not buy Ford? If a little more gets me into Mercury, why not buy Mercury? For a brand new mark, the moment the boundary isn't sharp, customers go back to the safe choice because they're buying both reputation and peace of mind. Then Ford also loaded a deal with a few technical gimmicks to create a sense of breakthrough. Most notably, Teletouch Drive, push-button shifting on the steering wheel. In advertising, it was the future. But in real life, it could easily become a nuisance. Failures, a weak motor, electrical hassles, even cases of wiring melting due to placement near heat sources like the exhaust. For middle-class buyers looking to move up, what they needed was a car that felt more upscale, but remained dependable. The moment they heard bad talk about the shift system, they hesitated. The quality problem was further deepened by the way production was handled. Edsel didn't have its own factory. It was assembled intermixed on mercury lines. That made consistent quality control difficult. Workers could easily mix up parts. And in the tense internal atmosphere, rumors even surfaced of resistance, even quiet sabotage. For a new brand that already carried a sense of being uneven, uncertain, the first impression would stick for a long time, especially in an era when Americans bought cars as a major family asset. Before they could correct course, a macro headwind hit. The 1958 recession shifted buyers' priorities towards smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. Edsel, already in the traditional American gas guzzler group and positioned as a step-up car, was struck right at its weak point. When wallets tightened, curiosity no longer turned into signed contracts, and a new brand is always the first thing to be cut. Finally came internal politics. Robert McNamara, the man dubbed the bean counter, was never sympathetic to the project. When the numbers started to turn bad, he had even more reason to tighten spending, cutting the advertising budget, demanding shared Ford body shells to reduce costs, and gradually building the case to convince Henry Ford II that it should end. Edsel lived on momentum, on belief, and on time to correct both image and quality. When there was already a force pulling against it from within, it lost the most precious thing it needed to save itself. Edsel's design is where every controversy condensed into a single detail. The front end, especially the grille. Ford wanted Edsel to be different at first glance, so they pursued the idea of vertical emphasis, emphasizing the vertical. While most American cars of that era favored horizontal lines spread wide, creating a low and long look. But real life doesn't forgive things that are different, without being beautiful in the eyes of the majority. Edsel's upright grille was quickly compared by the public and the press to hard-to-shake nicknames, horse collar, and worse, toilet seat. The sense of strangeness was further amplified by the headlight layout. When the headlights were set far apart, combined with an overly strong vertical center section, the car's face looked like a cartoon expression. And later, people even compared it to Sid in Ice Age. The kind of association any brand fears because it makes the car look like it's looking at you in a way that isn't serious. Ford understood the problem and tried to fix it quickly. By 1959, Edsel received a facelift. The grille was softened, less crude, the front end was less shocking, and the headlights were lowered to make the face more balanced. Many people even today look at the 1959 model and admit it was easier on the eyes, even having a look that fit the era. But the problem was that time wasn't on Edsel's side. The first impression of 1958 had become a label, and even a good facelift was like rewriting the script. By 1960, Edsel shifted to a safer direction with a split grille, a divided grille reminiscent of Pontiac. That was a clear sign of a brand backing away from risk to try to survive through familiarity. But when a brand has to borrow someone else's design language just to be hated less, its original identity is essentially gone. And that change came too late to reverse the momentum of failure. Edsel left behind a loss of about $350 million, a figure that, when converted to today's value, is often cited at around $2. $4 billion, not just money, but the cost of ambition, of plants, advertising, the dealer network, and a reputation worn down. By the end of 1959, The decision was made like the decisive slam of a hood. Ford stopped Edsel production in November 1959. To clear the way and pull customers back, the company also made a very practical appeasement move, a $300 discount voucher for anyone who traded an Edsel in for a new Ford. It was Ford's way of acknowledging failure while still trying to hold on to trust, as if telling customers, "We won't abandon you with this choice." But Edsel's legacy wasn't only a brand that got put to death. It was also pieces of the project that were spliced so they could live on. The clearest example was the compact car plan named Edsel Comet. When Edsel collapsed, the name Comet was transferred to Mercury and became the Mercury Comet. And ironically, that car sold extremely well, as if a seed only needed to be planted in the right row to bloom. Edsel died, but part of its DNA still found the right path within the Ford family. And there's always the question, if Edsel hadn't been shut down too early, if it had lived long enough to reinvent itself through the 60s and then step into the 70s, the era of muscle cars, of stripe graphics, of a V8 growling on the highway, could Edsel have become a completely different name in America's memory? People often imagine playful renderings, an Edsel with a fastback shape or an Edsel in the personal luxury coupe style that might have washed off the nickname and turned its oddness into character. But history didn't give that brand enough time to rewrite itself. And so Edsel's ending settles in as an expensive lesson for the auto industry. Market research cannot replace the public's aesthetic instinct. The bigger the hype, the more painful the letdown. When positioning is vague, customers will return to the familiar name. And a new brand, if it isn't protected by quality and internal unity, will break the moment the headwinds arrive. Edsel is not just a famous failure. It's a reminder that in Detroit, sometimes what kills a car isn't the engine, but the distance between the promise and the real feeling when a buyer puts a hand on the door handle. If you've ever stood quietly in front of an old car and heard an entire era softly breathing through faded paint, help this channel keep that flame alive. Hit like to support these reels of Detroit's golden years, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories of classic American cars, from big winning legends to tragedies like Edsel. Do you have any memories with Edsel? Or have you ever seen one in real life? Leave a comment. I read every line. And if there's a model you want me to dive into next, just name it. We'll open the garage of memories together. See you again, everyone.